It's very, very important that we realize that goodness does not mean perfection, and it cannot mean perfection because we're human. Goodness rather is the fact, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, subhanAllah, when He describes the people of Jannah, when He describes those who will get to Jannah, He describes them as people, as people who repent, as people who, when they make a mistake, when they oppress their own selves, they turn back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's part of being a good person, is tawbah, is coming back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's humbling yourself. It's not being perfect. It's not never making a mistake. So realizing that actually prevents you from becoming hopeless once that does happen. And I think that this whole idea of perfection is actually also something that shaitan uses against us, and I'll explain why. When you think of, for example, this happens a lot with hijabis, with sisters who either want to wear hijab or already do wear hijab. A lot of times one of the tricks of shaitan is this, is he'll whisper to you, because of this idea of perfection, that you really shouldn't wear hijab until first you become perfect. So this idea of like, I need to be a saint first, right? I need to be an angel first before I put on hijab. It's like hijab is this seal. Hijab is kind of this destination that once you've perfected everything else, then you wear hijab. And really, I don't know where that idea even comes from, because hijab is just like any other act of ibadah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's like any other act of obedience, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us to fast in Ramadan, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us to pray, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us to give sadaqah, to give zakah, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us to treat our families well. These are the commandments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and out of obedience to Him, we obey these commands. Similarly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us to act a certain way and to dress a certain way. And so it's just another act of obedience when we wear hijab or when we act a certain way. And so we shouldn't, see it as some sort of it's like a seal of being angelic or something. And the idea here is then what happens with that is many things start to happen as a result of believing that. One is that it becomes a barrier from you to wear hijab, because shaitan will come at you and say, oh, like, you're not good enough. You're not really, you first have to work on all these other things before you are kind of like worthy enough to wear hijab. Which is very strange, because hijab should be an enabler, because one of the things that hijab does is it actually protects you. It actually serves as sort of like an extra barrier between you and the haram. And this isn't to say you can't commit haram. I mean, of course, people do still commit haram while wearing hijab, but it is that extra barrier Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you. So it actually should be an enabler to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It should be a means and a tool to help you get there, rather than just a seal once you're already there. So this idea, again, it also makes us very intolerant when we see, for example, a hijabi who is maybe she's not doing the best job, or she's not being quote unquote the best Muslim. People are very judgmental of her, more so than they would be of somebody who isn't wearing hijab. And that doesn't really nobody says that once you wear hijab you all of a sudden transform into an angel. You're still a human being, and just like other people, you still have your weaknesses and you still have your faults. So the idea is that it's just another act that we're trying, that someone tries towards the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Some of the questions that people have been asking, there's a number of questions that were regarding hijab. For example, asking how can you for example, convince someone to wear hijab, or how can you get basically how do you get the courage to wear hijab? And I think that anytime we ask a question like this about hijab or otherwise, wearing hijab or not wearing hijab is really it's kind of like a symptom of another issue. Everything that we do externally is a reflection of what we are internally. And so when we look at how we are in our actions or how we are externally, we have to see it as rooted inside. So if I'm having, for example, I'm really struggling with something, that's a sign that there's something internally that I need to work on. So for example, if I'm really struggling with giving up something which is displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I'm having really a lot of trouble, I'm struggling to lower my gaze, for example, or I'm struggling to give up a haram relationship, or I'm struggling to give up haram, maybe a haram income, or a job which involves riba, or any of these things. If I'm really having a lot of trouble with that, or I'm struggling to wear hijab, I have to look internally and see what is it inside of me that's making this so difficult. And a lot of times what it comes down to is my attachments. A lot of times it comes down to what is it that I love most. And these things that happen in our lives are really just to show us what we need to work on inside. They're a reflection of what we are inside, and therefore it points out those diseases, if you will, internally that need to be addressed. So maybe if I'm having trouble with my salah, or I'm having trouble with hijab, for example, maybe it means that I am too attached to what society thinks of me. Maybe it's because I'm too attached to seeking a certain type of attention, or maybe I don't feel enough value in myself, that I need to be valued. I need to get that certain type of attention in order to feel valued. So again, it can, a lot of times, it can stem from an internal place that we're at. And sometimes, it depends, sometimes it's other things. But what we really have to do is every individual person needs to look internally and see what is the source of this struggle that I'm going through, or, this ma'asiyah, maybe this sin that I'm continuously committing against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so with regards to hijab, for example, the hijab, putting on the hijab is going to become a lot easier when I've built my relationship with Allah and I have a close relationship with Him. Love and obedience come hand in hand. The more that you love someone, the more that you want to please them. And when you do love someone and you are in love with someone, everything they tell you, you hear and you obey. You want to do what they want, what they love. You want to make them happy. You want them to be pleased with you. And so the more that we love Allah, the more that we build that strong attachment to Him through the ibadah, through salah, through dhikr, through the remembrance of Allah, then, you don't need to force someone to wear hijab after that. You don't need to convince them to wear hijab after that. As soon as they know this is what the one that I love wants, they do it, and this is, again, it comes as a consequence of love, and a consequence of fear, because when you love someone, your greatest fear is to displease them. When you love someone, your greatest fear is for them to cut you off, for them to want to have nothing to do with you, for them to say, I don't know you anymore, right? For them to disown you. That's your greatest fear when you love someone. So our fear when it comes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our greatest fear is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would be displeased with us, that Allah would come on the Day of Judgment and say that He doesn't want to speak to us, that He doesn't want to see us.